We had put out some Instagram stories while we were filming this video series here in Ecuador and asked you guys what questions you guys wanted to have answered throughout our process of creating this series. And these were 5 of the questions that we felt were most relevant and that were things that we hadn't covered otherwise. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Great question, especially here in Ecuador. Right now we're here in the Amazon and there's a lot of humidity. The challenge is that when you go from a colder environment, such as a room that has air conditioning, and then you go out to an area that has lots of humidity. The best way to deal with this is to keep your camera gear when it is in your room away from any of the air conditioners so it doesn't get extremely cold. On top of that, what you can do is once you wake up, is that you can take your camera gear, open it up out of your bag, and put it outside as you're getting ready. What this will do is allow your camera gear to hit the right temperature for everything that's happening outside, and you'll minimize the chance of having to deal with fog or other issues when it comes to humidity getting inside your camera gear. You know, we have a whole section, video section or video episode focused on helping you guys put together your own adventures, but regardless, I'll quickly answer your question. When it comes to wildlife especially, or even certain elements of landscape, I'm constantly looking for unique subjects to photograph and capture, and then doing the research to figure out what time of year I need to go, what regions they're known to be in. Those are all the different pieces that kind of comes together and helps dictate the types of locations that I tend to find myself in. Now, this is incredibly important, especially when it comes to wildlife photography, because certain species are endemic to certain regions, certain times of the year are better than others, so you really have to do your due diligence, do your research, and make sure you're in the right place, at the right time, hopefully with the right gear, and you can come away with some great stuff. So our third question asks if I recommend the 100 to 400 f4.5 to 5.6 or the Sony 200 to 600 f5.6 to 6.3 for a beginner, someone getting into wildlife photography. This is a great question and ultimately comes down to a couple different things. One I'd say is budget. The 100 to 400 is a G Master Series lens, which means it's going to be a little bit more expensive. The 200 to 600 is going to be a bit more affordable, so you have to take that into account. The next most important element of this is what you want to photograph to begin with. If you are a birder, you're going to want to have that extra reach of that 600 millimeter range of the 200 to 600. However, if you find yourself wanting to photograph more of the larger mammals, things like jaguars or ocelots or things like that, you're going to find yourself probably in a happier place around the 100 to 400 range. Either way, you have to take into account the ideas of budget, portability, packability, and ultimately the subjects you want to photograph. For the most part, for most of my work, because I shoot a wide variety of things from landscapes to travel to wildlife and astro, most of my use of filters centers around the idea of landscape photography. I love using ND filters to slow down my shutter speeds when it comes to waterfalls. I love using circular polarizers in order to cut reflections. When it comes to wildlife photography, however, I generally don't find myself using filters all that much. And the reason for that is twofold. One, things are happening usually very quickly. So if I'm photographing a subject that's in motion or even that surprises us, I don't have time to throw on filters and things like that. And number two, most of the larger lenses that I'm using don't have the easy ability to use something like a CPL. Now on the 400 and the 600 for the Sony Prime lenses, you can put in a very small filter in the back of the lens in order to get a little bit of an ND effect, but that's mostly used for video work. It's not something that I would typically use for still images. I think for me personally, I would say probably neither. And the reason for that is that an SD card, or really a CF card, any card having an issue, it can happen. Like you can have malfunctions. But in my history of doing this for 18 years, I can think of maybe 1 or 2 times where that's happened. So it's not something I typically worry about. And then when it comes to the wild animals and getting eaten, I am always working with naturalist guides in the places that I'm going to. I'm working with people that do their due diligence, that know their research, that have experience from a local level. And at the same time, I'm going to make sure that I too am doing my research and not putting myself in a position where I might find myself in a situation where it might not be beneficial for myself and certainly not for the animal. So I don't think either of them are things that I have to necessarily worry about. Bring enough SD cards, do your research, and don't put yourself in a situation that is going to be, put you in peril when it comes to the species you're trying to photograph.